The night was black and bitterly cold. Snow fell in thick sheets over the ruined French countryside, muting the sound of distant artillery. Private William Hart crouched in a trench barely wide enough for his shoulders, his rifle trembling in his frozen hands. The men around him were silent, not from courage but from exhaustion. The war had eaten them alive. Hart had been at the front for 112 days without rest. He'd seen friends torn apart by shells, bodies frozen into grotesque sculptures by winter. He was 24 years old, but his eyes looked 40. And that night, under the fractured moonlight of December 1944, he decided he couldn't take it anymore. When the officer's whistle blew, signaling another suicidal charge into the forest, Hart stayed behind. He dropped his rifle, crawled over the frozen corpses at the edge of the trench, and ran. He didn't stop to think. He didn't stop to pray. He just ran through the snow, through the night, through the screams of his own conscience. By dawn, he was 10 miles away from the line, hiding in an abandoned farmhouse, shaking uncontrollably. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a deserter, and he knew what that meant. If caught, he'd be shot by his own men. Part 1: The Fall. Before the war, William Hart had been a quiet man from Ohio. He worked in a small machine shop, fixing broken engines. He had a gentle way about him, the kind of man who'd rescue a bird caught in a fence. When war came, he didn't rush to enlist. He waited until the draft made the choice for him. The army turned him into something else. They gave him a rifle, a uniform, a number. They told him his purpose was to fight, not to think. He followed orders even when they made no sense. Until that winter in France when nothing made sense anymore. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. Hitler's last desperate gamble to push back the Allies. The forest was alive with fire and death. Every day, hundreds of men disappeared into the snow, some captured, some buried. Hart had watched his squad dwindle from 12 men to 4. He'd seen his sergeant die screaming for his mother. And when command ordered another charge into machine gun fire, something inside him broke. He ran that night not because he was a coward, but because he was human. The road through silence. For days, Hart wandered the frozen countryside, avoiding both sides. He stole bread from empty homes, drank melted snow, slept in barns with rats for company. Every sound, a plane overhead, a distant shout, made his heart stop. He imagined every shadow was a patrol coming to kill him. On the third night, he stumbled into a small village, or what was left of it. The Germans had burned it days before. The church was half collapsed, the bell lying shattered in the snow. Inside one of the houses, Hart found something that would change his life. A child, maybe 10 years old, half-starved, hiding under a table. Her name was Elise. She spoke barely any English, but he understood enough. Her parents had been killed when the SS passed through. She was alone. Hart could have left her, but he didn't. He gave her his last piece of bread and sat beside her as the wind howled outside. For the first time since he ran, he felt something like purpose again. The soldier without a flag. The days turned into weeks. Hart stopped counting them. He scavenged what he could from abandoned trucks, stayed off the roads, and cared for the girl. They moved mostly at night, following the sound of distant gunfire, away from it. He taught her a few words of English: food, quiet, safe. She called him Billy. But war had a way of finding everyone. One morning, as he crossed an open field, he heard shouting. Not German, but American. A U.S. patrol had spotted him. At first, he thought they'd rescue him. But when they raised their rifles, shouting "Hands up," he realized the truth. He was wearing no insignia, no uniform. To them, he looked like a spy. They took him in at gunpoint, tied his hands, and brought him to their company commander, a man named Captain Robert Mills, a hardened veteran from Texas with no patience for excuses. Deserter. Mills studied Hart for a long time. Hart's uniform was torn, his face hollow, his eyes wild. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but cold. Private William Hart. AWOL since December 18th. You understand what that means? Hart nodded weakly. Yes, sir. You abandoned your post during active combat. That's desertion under fire. The penalty is death. Hart tried to explain. The girl, the cold, the hopelessness. But Mills didn't want to hear it. To him, war had no room for explanations. Men died because others ran. Still, there was something in Hart's eyes that made Mills hesitate. A kind of haunted sincerity. He wasn't lying. He was broken. You'll be held until we contact headquarters, Mills said. After that, it's not my decision. They locked Hart in a storage hut, guarded by 2 soldiers. Elise was allowed to stay nearby under watch. She refused to leave him. That night, Hart sat in the dark, listening to the distant shelling. He knew he had days left, maybe hours, but fate had other plans. The attack. At dawn, the German counterattack hit. Shells screamed through the trees. Mortars exploded across the frozen fields. Captain Mills' company was caught in the open. Chaos erupted. The front collapsed in minutes. As the first shells hit, Hart's guards abandoned their post to join the fight. The girl screamed as the hut shook from explosions. Hart kicked the door until the hinges snapped, grabbed Elise, and ran into the smoke. Bullets cut the air like angry hornets. He dove behind a wrecked jeep, shielding the child with his body. He saw wounded men crawling, calling for medics who'd never come. He saw Mills trying to rally his soldiers, shouting orders through the chaos. And in that moment, something inside Hart shifted again. He wasn't thinking about death or punishment anymore. He was thinking about them, the men he'd left behind. The war he'd run from had found him, and this time, he wouldn't run. The return of a soldier. Hart spotted a burning half-track nearby. Inside, a radio operator was screaming for help. He sprinted through the shellfire, pulled the man free, and dragged him to cover. Then he grabbed the radio, trying to call for artillery support. This is Private Hart, American position under heavy attack. Grid 38 by 22. We need fire support now. The operator stared in disbelief. A deserter calling in fire missions. But it worked. Minutes later, the earth shook as Allied shells rained down on the German line. Hart fought for 6 straight hours. He fired until his hands blistered, ran ammo to the men, pulled the wounded back through the snow. When the smoke finally cleared, the enemy had been pushed back. Captain Mills found him kneeling in the snow, covered in soot and blood, still alive. The girl sat beside him, clutching his sleeve. For a long time, neither man spoke. Then Mills said quietly, "You saved us, Hart. Every damn one of us." Hart didn't answer. He just stared at the sunrise breaking over the horizon, the first he'd really looked at in months. The morning after. The battlefield was silent now. Snowflakes drifted through the smoke like ghosts searching for peace. Bodies lay scattered across the white ground, friend and foe alike. The war didn't care about sides. It devoured everyone the same way. Private William Hart sat on the frozen earth, staring at his hands. They were trembling not from cold, but from the weight of what he'd done. He'd saved lives, yes, but in the eyes of the army he was still a deserter. No amount of heroism could erase that word. Captain Mills approached slowly, stepping around the fallen. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with soot, but his voice was steady. "You disobeyed orders once," Mills said quietly, "and maybe you'll hang for it. But today you gave those orders when no one else could. You kept us alive." Hart didn't look up. "I just didn't want to run anymore, sir." Mills sighed. "Then don't. Not from this." He turned and walked away, leaving Hart in silence as the medics gathered the wounded and the dead. The trial. 2 weeks later, Hart stood before a military tribunal in a drafty tent near the French border. The war was still raging, but the army found time for judgment. The charges were simple: desertion under fire. The penalty, even in wartime chaos, was death. 3 officers sat behind a wooden table, their expressions carved in stone. Captain Mills was there too, not as a witness for the prosecution but for the defense. He'd insisted. The lead officer, Colonel Avery, spoke without emotion. "Private William Hart, you abandoned your post during active combat. Do you deny it?" Hart stood straight, eyes hollow but calm. "No, sir, I don't." "You're aware that hundreds of men fought while you fled?" "Yes, sir." "Then why? Why did you run?" Hart hesitated, then said simply, "Because I was afraid. Because I thought the war was already lost, and I couldn't watch anyone else die." The colonel's expression didn't change, but Mills leaned forward, unable to stay silent. "With respect, sir," Mills said, "this man saved my entire company. He called in artillery under fire. He carried wounded men out of the line. If that's a coward, then I don't know what courage is anymore." The tribunal fell silent. Outside, snow began to fall again, tapping gently against the canvas walls. After a long pause, Colonel Avery spoke. "Private Hart, the regulations are clear. Desertion in wartime cannot be ignored. But considering your actions during the recent engagement, this court finds reason for clemency." He looked down at his papers. Sentence commuted. Reassigned to active duty probationary. Report to Captain Mills' unit immediately. Hart didn't move. He just whispered, almost to himself, "Thank you, sir." He wasn't free, but he was alive. And for the first time he felt he deserved to be. Redemption. The months that followed were brutal. Germany was collapsing, but every inch of ground was paid for in blood. Hart returned to Mills' command, now a shadow of what it once was. The men who knew of his past whispered about him, the deserter who came back. But slowly, as they saw how he fought, how he carried the wounded and never hesitated under fire, the whispers turned to respect. He didn't seek glory. He didn't give speeches. He just did his job with a quiet, relentless resolve. He never spoke of the night he ran, or of the little girl who followed him through the snow. But she stayed with the company too, a ghost of innocence among soldiers hardened by hell. Mills had managed to arrange protection for her through the Red Cross. Before she left for England, she hugged Hart tightly, whispering in broken English, "You good man, Billy. Not bad man." He smiled faintly. Maybe one day. The last mission. April 1945. Germany was dying, but not quietly. The Allies pushed deeper into the ruins of the Reich, street by street, town by town. Hart's company received orders to secure a bridge near the Elbe River, a vital crossing to cut off retreating German forces. The problem? It was rigged with explosives, defended by a desperate garrison. Mills gathered his men. "We take that bridge or we lose the whole damn valley. No backup. No retreat." Hart volunteered to lead the advance squad. No one was surprised. No one questioned it. As night fell, they crawled through the ruins toward the bridge. Tracer fire cut the sky. Hart moved like a ghost, silent and focused. Every sound, every flicker of light, he registered it all. When they reached the bridge, he saw the detonator wires, thick cables running into a bunker on the far side. One German soldier sat by the plunger, trembling, waiting for the right moment. Hart took a deep breath. He sprinted across the open span, bullets snapping around him. He tackled the German before he could press the charge, knocking the detonator away. They wrestled in the mud, knives flashing under the moonlight. Then a gunshot and silence. When Mills and his men reached him, the bridge was intact. Hart was alive, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, the detonator crushed beneath his boot. Mills knelt beside him. "Damn it, Hart. You really don't know when to quit." Hart smiled weakly. "I ran once, sir. I'm not running again." The end of war. Days later, Germany surrendered. The guns finally fell silent. For the first time in years, the air didn't smell of fire. In the weeks that followed, men went home. Some carried medals. Some carried ghosts. Hart carried both. Captain Mills filed a report recommending him for commendation for extraordinary bravery in combat. But there was a problem. His record still listed him as a deserter. The army couldn't give a medal to a man who once ran from the fight. The paperwork was buried in bureaucracy. His name never appeared in the official bulletins. But among the men who served with him, William Hart became something far greater than a name on a list. He became a story, told around campfires, passed quietly from one soldier to another. The man who ran, and then came back. Epilogue: the man he became. Years later, long after the war ended, a journalist found him. He was living quietly in Ohio again, repairing machines, same as before. No medals on the wall, no stories told. When asked about the war, he only said, "I did what I had to do. Some days that meant running. Other days it meant staying. What matters is that, in the end, I stopped running." The journalist wrote an article titled, "The Deserter Who Saved a Company." It never made front-page news, but among veterans it spread like wildfire. At reunions, men would stand when his name was mentioned. Some saluted. Some just nodded quietly, as if acknowledging something sacred. And every winter, when snow began to fall, Hart would walk outside, look up at the sky, and remember a little girl whispering, "You good man, Billy." He never saw her again, but he liked to think she made it home. He liked to think that somewhere she told someone about the man who'd once been afraid and found his courage when it mattered most. Final lines, the echo of redemption. Heroes aren't born on battlefields. They're made in the moments between running and standing still, in the silence where fear becomes something else. And sometimes, the bravest thing a man can do is come back.